Okay. So John and I welcome everybody here. If you haven't met me before, I'm Lynne Allin, and I am the Minister for Congregational Support for Antler River Watershed and for Horseshoe Falls. And John, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm the same, except for Western Ontario Waterways, Minister for Congregational Support.
So the two of us work really closely. Most of the documents you see on the websites that are the toolkits we've put together, and we thought it would be helpful to be able to do this collaborative ministry workshop online together. We've done a lot of them within our own regions, but this way we have something that we can share with a video, and also for those of you who haven't been able to be at one of the in-person gatherings we've done. So with that, we are glad to have you here. I'm showing 39 participants so far, which is excellent. Some of you may have already been to one of our other gatherings, and that's great. This is an opportunity for you to sort of get a refresher. We will have time for questions at the end as well, or if there's something that pops up and you want to put a question in the chat, or if you have problems staying connected or hearing or seeing something, then you can let us know that as well. Let's open our gathering with recognition that we are on lands across our areas that have been occupied and home to people for millennia, long before the settlers arrived. And so we acknowledge that we are indebted to those who have cared for the land. We are grateful for the presence of the Indigenous communities among us now, and we recommit ourselves to working toward truth and reconciliation, so that our acknowledgement isn't just about the past, but is also about what we hope to do today and moving forward, so that together we might be in relationship with one another as well as the land. And let us open with prayer. Holy One, you call us together to do ministry in your name. We give thanks for this privilege. We also know that it comes with challenges, and one of those challenges is change that are causing us to rethink the ways that we have been doing ministry and look for new options. And so we pray that your Spirit might move among us, opening our hearts and minds and imaginations as we continue to work to be your church. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So I think, John, I'm the one that's kicking this off. Is that what we decided?
Yes, it was.
Okay. That was Friday. That was a long time ago. So I wanted to start by talking about collaborative agreements, because that's sort of the basis for what we're dealing with here. A collaboration is basically whenever two or more communities of faith work together in a more formal way. So lots of times you might have been going back and forth for summer services, or you might get together with a neighboring church for, say, a Good Friday service. Those have been informal ways that you collaborate. What we're looking at today is the more formal ways of collaboration that are usually based on an actual written agreement. So it can be between two or more communities of faith. It's in part of working together to maintain a community presence. And this way we are able to sort of share resources so that the United Church continues to be part of your local community. It's also an option for providing some stability. We all know that our congregations are facing times of change and challenge. And so when we work together, we might find efficiencies and we might find ways to share our resources so that we can cover off the different things that need to be done without everybody doing it independently. So basically, it's finding more effective and efficient ways to work together. And that might be sharing someone who does pastoral care, or sharing an admin person, or sharing volunteers that are working on a particular program or opportunity. So lots and lots of opportunities to do this. It's as wide as your imagination, and the benefits can be there for everybody who's participating. The nice thing about these collaborative agreements is that each one is unique. So it is set up to meet the local needs and the needs of the congregations involved. So for example, if it's setting up to maybe share an outreach project, if that is the local need, or it could be, as I said, set up to meet the need of congregations who don't have ministry personnel. Whatever the specific situation, we can customize those agreements to fit that local context. The other thing that is important, though, in all of these, no matter what the agreement involves, is that there has to be good communication and a willingness to be flexible. And I say sort of tongue in cheek that in some cases that means having to change the time of worship. And we all know that that is sometimes a difficult change, but if you're going to be sharing ministry personnel, for example, it might be essential that you change. So going into these agreements and discussions with your neighboring congregations, we ask that you go in with a willingness to be flexible and to communicate well with each other and with your own communities of faith.
Yeah, I'm just going to switch here.
Yeah.
So there are some questions that we should that you should consider if you're thinking about a collaborative agreement of some sort. And that first and foremost, I think, is how do we maintain a United Church presence within our communities? When there seems to be a number of churches closing or reducing their ministry time, which could be a sign of a near end also, that I guess collaborative agreements allow us to help prolong and perhaps turn around our current situation that allows for a United Church presence within the communities. We think about your building and what role your building might play. If you're using your building only for Sunday services, or maybe the odd group that comes in, just think about the space that your church has and how it might be used in the community in different or new ways to allow for more involvement and more use of building. And how that might work with in a collaborative agreement in sharing different resources. So building space could be part of it, or in sharing programs that could be held joint programs in one building or the other. Something to consider as you think about collaborative agreements is the question, what happens if we want to just continue as we are? Well, it's fine if you want to do that. There's nothing stopping you from doing so. But as we have seen post-COVID, there's been a decline in the return of membership and finances. So that's volunteerism as well. And we encourage looking at new and innovative ways of doing things so that you can look forward, and part of that is collaboration. But the question remains, what happens if you just continue as you have been? And only you can answer that question, but you'll have to look at your own history. For collaboration, there is a minimum amount of viability that's needed. So if you have very few people left and very little energy to do any work, and you have very little finances where you cannot support your own basic needs of keeping your building open, and perhaps sharing some ministry time, like an expense for ministry time, then you may not be viable enough to be able to consider collaboration in the first place. Though, in saying that, there are some very unique arrangements that have been made. For instance, one that was just approved is a church that is quite healthy has offered in a collaborative agreement 2 hours of work to another church. So what that means is all of the expense of preparing the service and all of that is being held in the one church, or held by the one church, but they're offering Sunday services to the other church. That's the limit of that agreement, and it's only for 2 hours. So there's lots of different possibilities. And as Lynne had mentioned, it's whatever, I guess, you can dream up, but whatever works for the group of churches that are trying to collaborate. Do you want to pick up on this one, Lynne?
Sure. So one of the ways to approach this is by looking at what assets or what gifts and skills each community of faith in the area has to offer. And we have an inventory resource page on the website under collaborative agreements, or collaborative ministry, that you can use to start brainstorming. And it can be very helpful and actually make your congregation feel really good to start thinking about all the things you do have instead of all the things you don't have. So I've heard back from congregations who've done this at their annual meeting or at another congregational gathering, and they've said they've really enjoyed it. So you might not be thinking about the fact that, hey, we have an approved kitchen that can be used for things, or we have somebody with great tech skills, or we have somebody with wonderful music talents, or we have a full-time minister. All sorts of things that you have. And I sort of say it's like bringing it to the potluck. Once you know what you have to offer, then everybody sort of brings that inventory. So if we have 3 or 4 congregations in a community that are meeting, or just 2 neighboring congregations that want to chat, you'd bring that, and then you would be able to say, okay, these are the things we have. I have this, you need that. How can we put them together? So that's a good starting point. And then it's also, again, back to that question, how do we use them to maintain a United Church presence? If we really believe that the United Church has something unique to offer, then I believe it's important for us to start thinking about how we make sure that there is a United Church presence available for anybody who is looking to be part of our ministry, or so that we can reach out to those who would perhaps be interested in being part of our ministry. And so that is part of what I hope becomes the common ground for what brings congregations together. And so we might start looking at what ministry priorities do we share. So again, imagine we've got 2 congregations that are sitting down to start chatting, and they say, well, yes, we both agree that worship and pastoral care are very important to our communities of faith. How can we work together to make sure those are covered? We might say that, serving as a community hub, so providing rental space to the community and to different agencies in our community. How might we approach that? we have an example in London where we have 3 churches who are collaborating to hire a youth minister, and she does ministry on behalf of all 3 congregations. And that is working out very well, and it's a great example. So you might come together to hire a pastoral care coordinator, or a parish nurse, or you might have somebody who is even a volunteer, but you bring your pastoral care teams together. Those sorts of examples. Or maybe you are involved in Canada Food Grains Bank. You might invite the other congregation to be part of that outreach program. So again, we're looking for you just sort of find that common ground of your ministry priorities, and where you might be able to find those points of connection for working together.
So collaborative agreements, just to reiterate, are when 2 or more communities of faith work together, sharing resources with a formal agreement. And these formal agreements are approved by the Congregational Support Commission of your regional council. Not because we need to approve the actual agreement, but rather we just want to make sure that you have included all the necessary parts that you need to in an agreement, so that you're not caught off guard later. An example might be, it's often left out that what happens if one of the parties wants to exit the agreement. So there should be a line or paragraph there to explain what that looks like for your agreement and the churches involved. So we just look at it to make sure that it seems sound and fair for everyone, and that everyone understands it. We also, collaborative agreements are different from a pastoral charge or an amalgamation. So as you know, an amalgamation is when a couple of churches get together and they become one new one, honoring their histories. A pastoral charge is when there are 2 points in a pastoral charge. It's not a pastoral charge because you remain completely independent as a church. You don't have a board that oversees your churches that are grouped together, but rather you just have a coordinating team that addresses the issues of the collaboration agreement. So it only holds the churches accountable to what you've agreed upon. And if there are changes or tweaks that have to be made, this is not a governing body that oversees the various churches involved in the collaborative agreement. And again, agreements are specific to your situation. We often get asked, can we have an example? It's like, well, we can show you an example, but yours might look completely different. So what we did is we created the template that addresses some of the main issues that you might need to deal with, and then you can add or subtract whatever you need from that template. Collaborative agreements can be ongoing, or they can be for a specific length of time. We always encourage that a collaborative agreement, because it's a new thing, try it out for a year and then decide before the end of the first year to look at the agreement and how it's been going and to evaluate that. You can also decide, put a time limit on, and there are sometimes that works better because it's for a specific reason. But you could decide that you want to do it for 1 year while you're doing some kind of transition or change within your community of faith. So you're setting a time limit for the collaborative agreement. Most are ongoing, and there's usually, I would say, 60 days, no, 6 months of notice. I would encourage, some are 3 months, but I would encourage 6 months notice if you're going to change the agreement, because it can have some very big implications on the churches involved. They can also be ecumenically shared ministries. So a collaborative agreement could be with another denomination that you can share within one building, or it can be where I guess within one building. That's what we're talking about here, right, Lynn?
Yes.
So you get different denominations involved, and we've worked out some of those types of arrangements and have some of those arrangements within our regional councils already. It also, again, and you'll hear us say this a lot, it requires really good communication, and it requires a willingness to be flexible. We believe in transparent and lots of communication, and so that it's really important that you adopt that policy within your collaborative agreements so that they can be worked out in positive ways. We'll jump back over to you, Lynn.
Yep. So that is sort of the overview of what a collaborative agreement is in general. Now we want to share with you some specific examples of types of collaborative agreements. And one of them that is quite common is sharing ministry personnel. So you have two congregations or more, and they come together and they have hired the minister. Sometimes it starts that one congregation has a full-time minister and the other congregation has no minister, and they start talking and that position gets changed so that the minister is now serving both congregations. Other times we might have two congregations come together and neither one of them has a minister, and so they do the search together to hire a minister. But at the end of the day, they have one or more ministry personnel to share between the congregations that are part of the agreement. Again, as John mentioned, they still remain completely separate congregations and separate pastoral charges. They are not involved in governing together, although you might have some discussion about how you have input on each other's M&P committees. And then you could also look at, can you share other programs or other staff along with that? So, for example, we're suggesting if you're looking for a bookkeeper and you know that the church down the road has had a bookkeeper who's already familiar with United Church finances, then rather than, trying to look for your own, what if you went together and were able to create a position that's 10 hours a week, and the same bookkeeper does the books for both churches, or the same office administrator works for both churches. Because often I know it's hard to find somebody who is only going to work 1 or 2 hours for your church. But if you come together with other congregations, then you could maybe offer a position that is more appealing. So that's an opportunity as well. And then we have the circuit model, is what we tend to call it, because it reminds us back to our Methodist days when we had a minister that would go around on a circuit to several different congregations. And this is the same sort of idea where you have 3 or more congregations sharing a ministry team. So it might not just be one minister being expected to serve multiple congregations. It might be a minister and a licensed lay worship leader who's been hired as a congregational designated minister, so that each of them do 1 or 2 services each week, and then they rotate around the circuit. So there's, again, lots and lots of different ways to set this up, but that's the general idea. As I mentioned, its leadership is based on that rotating schedule. So you wouldn't have your minister every week, but you would have someone every week. And say within a month, you might have the same minister once or twice. That minister, though, provides pastoral care to all the congregations that are part of the agreement. they also attend the meetings, and we can look at creative ways to sort of streamline some of those meetings so that it's more manageable, and we're not trying to, the ministry personnel isn't trying to attend multiple meetings each week. In some cases, we're making really good use of technology. So we've had examples where the service is conducted in one congregation and then live streamed to the others. And then the minister might go to the next church the following week and live stream it from there. Or there may be opportunities where the weeks that the minister is at a different church, we are using Rural Connect or some other method of technology to provide the service for those churches that don't have the minister that week. Again, lots of flexibility and depends on the interest of the participants. And so it's also the needs of the participants. Some congregations are very happy doing some lay-led services. And so that can be worked in as well if there are congregations who want to take over some of the worship leadership on the Sundays when the minister is at one of the other congregations. Oh, you're muted, John.
Thanks, Lynn. Nesting is also a possibility, and this is a situation where a congregation may decide to sell its building, but continue as a community of faith. And so it would move in with another community of faith, but you would maintain your own identity. In this case, it's easier because you're in the same building. You can share programs and whatnot, and you can share costs or rent or things like that. It's a lot easier to share things, but as I'm saying, nesting is when one congregation sells its building, maintains its identity, but moves in and uses the space with another congregation. Technology, as Lynn touched on, is also around to help. It can help you connect with another congregation to share worship. With the Rural Connect, as Lynn had mentioned, that name, it allows churches that are on the hub, who are connected to the hub, they can share in a service in real time. So you would have some equipment in your church and the hub church coordinates it, but different churches would take different parts of the service, and each of that would be projected from your own church, but you would see what's happening in each of the other churches as well. So it's like sort of like a Zoom meeting where you can each share and participate, but you're in completely different locations. And with the hub technology, it allows you to stream that as one complete signal without delays and things like that. So you can connect with a live streaming hub using Rural Connect. That's what I just described. Or you can use it in conjunction with pulpit supply or minister rotation, which is part of what Lynn talked about as well. You may not have the person on your pulpit physically every week, but you could still have your same minister that you would see, at least the sermon part, on a screen during a service. And the rest of the service could be conducted together with other churches, or it could be conducted on your own, but you would stream the sermon in. Okay. And then we have campus ministries. Campus ministries are overseen by a representative governing body. We have one of these that is, they're striving to achieve this at this point within our regional councils, but we haven't quite arrived there yet. But it's being worked on, so this is a possibility. This allows, again, for the individual communities of faith needs to be met. It would also include rotational worship, and the governance requirements are met. And what it basically means is that you would have an umbrella church, I guess, name, or an umbrella governing body that would oversee the needs of multiple communities of faith. and participation in and financial participation in that can be determined in different ways. One of the ways that we're determining financial ability within collaborative agreements is what percentage that you're able to afford. And again, depending on the agreement and the churches involved, some say it doesn't matter what you can pay, the same ministries for everybody included. And some say, well, since we're paying 80%, we hope to get about 80% of the time, and the other church or churches, whatever percentage they are, would get that time. We've seen it both ways. It just depends on what you're looking for. And over to you, Lynn.
We know we're going through a lot of information really quickly here, and that it might be making your head spin a little bit. So this is why we wanted to note some resources that are available, and so that you can go back to them and you can look at them in more depth. So we're looking at the Community of Faith profile. Again, before you get into this, it's important for you to know, as a community of faith, what are your strengths and challenges. So by completing the profile, you'll have a clear look at your finances, at your demographics, and an opportunity to set your ministry priorities. Because going into these discussions, those are important things to know. On the Congregational, on the websites, you'll see the support toolkits, and there is, in toolkit 9 is specifically about collaborative ministry, but there are other toolkits there as well about property transactions and those sorts of things. Our Congregational Support Commission in each regional council is there to also provide guidance through this process. John and I are here to help answer questions. And then again, a couple of other tools are the asset inventory that I mentioned earlier. It's in that collaboration toolkit. Rural Connect, we can provide some contact information, but you can also find it through the through Google, United Church Rural Connect. And there's also the United Church Rural Ministry Network, which not many people have heard about yet, but it is a wonderful network of rural churches, and they provide some webinars, they have resources, they have regular meetings where they are looking at specifically the needs of rural ministry. And so I really encourage you to look for them if you are in rural ministry yourself.
Yeah, I would just add to that the United Church Rural Ministry Network is also great for support, because you can talk to other churches and what they're going through that are perhaps rural, if that's your situation.
In a lot of parts of Canada, they have gone through the changes that we are just experiencing here now. So they have more experience in some ways with doing collaborative agreements between large numbers of churches, ecumenical agreements, and just finding creative solutions. So we would recommend that you learn from others rather than all of us reinventing the wheel.
So that brings us to our question time. And again, like Lynn said, I know we've dumped a lot of information on you, so there may be questions that we can answer now. What would be easiest is if you could raise your hand virtually. So at the bottom of your screen, you should have some control elements there, and one of them would be reactions, and you can raise your hand that way. If not, perhaps just unmute yourself and identify that you'd like to speak, and we'll try and create a queue so that we can give everyone an opportunity. And
we'll stop sharing the slides so that we can see each other better. One of the things I would mention that John sort of touched on was that for some congregations, this is an opportunity for supporting their neighbors to become one of their ministry priorities. So if they have resources that they can share, whether that's help with program staff or administration or whatever, they are reaching out and saying, yes, we can share this with our neighbor. I would also mention that some of our collaborative ministries are minimal time. So 14 hours a month, for example, might be shared from the minister of the other congregation. So it doesn't always have to be, 20 hours each or that sort of thing. Again, it's always flexible. And we have examples of all those different types in the 3 regions.
You can also cross regional boundaries. Collaborations aren't dependent on staying in their own regions. We have a couple of them that have crossed boundaries into other regions, whether it's one of our 3 or even other ones.
So
It looks, Lynn, like we've been so thorough. There are no questions.
or we've just left them so overwhelmed.
Either one.
I was just wondering, did I hear you say that you keep your own board?
Yes. So in a collaboration, you're just agreeing on working together on certain aspects of your ministry, but you remain completely separate congregations with your own boards, and there's no governance that covers both of you. You might, but you probably would have a small team, 3 or 4 people who would review any questions or concerns that came up about the agreement, but they are not a governing board.
Thank you.
Yep. I would mention about nesting is I've seen several congregations use nesting as an opportunity to try working with another congregation without having to look at amalgamation. So they, basically have moved in, they're sharing one building, they're sharing the one minister and the programs, but they again remain separate congregations and manage their own finances and that sort of thing. So that's something we're encouraging, because sometimes our buildings are what are holding us back as well. Oh, there's some questions now.
Yeah, I saw just before we go with Diane, I saw Barb McGill look to raise her hand on screen. So Barb, why don't we go with you and then Diane after that?
So my question isn't fully formed, and maybe what I'm looking for is maybe somebody who's already done this to contact, but we're in the position where we're looking for a 20-hour-a-week admin. It's a good position, and we've had very little response to the advertisement. So we're bouncing around the idea of sharing, of collaborative ministry with that position, but like I guess we're wondering things about when church life. So much of the admin job is focused on, Sunday. And so really, I guess what I'm wondering, has anybody done this successfully with like 2 20-hour positions? And is there somebody that we can sort of talk this through with that has this experience? And what might our first steps be? So a lot there, I know, but it's sort of a new thing that just came up at our council yesterday, and we're trying to flesh it out a little bit.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm not aware of any at the moment that are doing like a splitting of admin person only. I know like some of the challenges that come there are if they're going to spend time in the church, what are the hours kind of thing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a collaborative agreement. It could be that you just hire somebody who is an admin in another church and they work out what times they can be in each of the locations. So it's 2 half-time jobs for them. You could do it as a collaborative agreement and see what can be shared within the administrative role, which could be quite helpful. So I don't really have an example for you. I would suggest the beginning place would be to contact the churches that are around you and see if they have a full-time admin or not. And if not, is it, I guess you could propose the idea that you're looking for an admin for 20 hours, and would they be willing to collaborate on sharing that person?
The other thing that you might share, as well as the person, is software. So that if you have specialty software for tracking membership or doing accounting, that sort of thing, you could use one set of the software if you're sharing the same person. So we promised to go to Diane, and then I also see some things popping up in the chat we'll get to.
This has been very, very informative, so I enjoyed the presentation. My question is, when it was mentioned that some churches sell the church and then nest, what happens to the money of the building that is sold is my question. Because I've heard of one amalgamation where they didn't want they had an amalgamation agreement that prevented the sale of the one building for a certain amount of time because they didn't want the building to be deemed excess. So I wondered if you knew anything about that.
So I would say there's a difference between collaboration and amalgamation. If a church sells a property and they continue to be a church, then the assets from the sale stay with them. But they do go into a restricted fund, which means all of the interest is available for whatever the congregation wishes to use it for. And the principal is accessible with consultation with the Congregational Support Commission. And they're usually looking to approve use of it for capital or ministry initiatives. So you want to start a seniors lunch program, you need to buy, the other day I said, you need to buy $10,000 worth of tea and coffee. And they laughed at me. And I said, well, I've seen how much tea, can be drank at some of these church functions. So, but that would make sense to say, well, we need to take that from those restricted funds. In an amalgamation, again, generally the monies go together, but we want to see what the newly amalgamated congregations' plans are for that as part of their ministry going forward. So those are the differences between collaboration and amalgamation. In collaboration, it just stays with whoever owned the property in the first place.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. George had put in the chat, has there been any discussion around liability insurance and benefits? So I'm not exactly sure what you're asking there specifically. If you're sharing ministry personnel, you all share the cost of not just the salary, but benefits, pension, etc. Because you're separate congregations, if we're talking about the building, each still has their own liability insurance for the building, for their buildings. And if you were nesting, I would think that the congregation that's moved in would probably still carry liability insurance for their programs. And then maybe the rent portion would, take into account some of the costs, including insurance and maintenance of the building. But if I'm completely misunderstanding your question, George, let us know.
Meanwhile, why don't we go to Pat and Ernie? You've raised your hand.
Right, thank you. We've been through a couple of different situations. So when we lived in Thunder Bay, we were in a situation with collaborative, where one church kind of looked after all the video and the Zoom and that type of thing. Right now we're in a different situation here in Hensel, Ontario, which is another one of these groups that were both in WOW and in Antler River. And we're growing pains. I think is the easiest way of putting that. The other thing that I'm concerned about is Minister Wearout. They're just burnt out because of a number of, like, there were 6 churches involved in this at one time. Has there been anything that said that limits the number of churches that can get involved in one of these type of situations? And I think my husband's question was with regards to what Lynne just mentioned about sharing the costs of staff and that type of thing.
So I know exactly the group of churches you're discussing, and I'm actually attending a meeting with the collaborative group. I think
that's on the 27th, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good.
Be there. So when that example was first set up, it wasn't just one minister. And so part of what we'll be looking at is how we move forward. But the reality is it also depends on what the congregations can afford. So I would say that no, there is no set limit. It is unique, but we have to talk about what is manageable. I've heard that in collaboration circuit ministries in the UK, for example, in the Anglican Church, a priest might have up to 27 congregations. But again, it means that the congregations are doing a lot of work independently because they're only going to see their priest on every few months. So I don't know any more details about how that works, but I do know that in each situation, you've got to make sure that there's something in place to cover everything that needs to be done. So that's part of our discussion.
Yeah, and I can just add to that I think it's really important when an agreement is struck that the position description also allows for an understanding of the expectations of the people involved. So if you have 6 churches, and there's a rotation, some might be led by lay worship leaders and so on different Sundays. The expectations of the hired staff, as in ministry personnel, I think it's really important to make clear on the position description the expectations so they don't burn out.
Yeah.
And I know that's part of the growing pains.
Okay. Yeah, Ernie?
Not you, or Ernie.
Yes, one of the questions I have, we talk about sharing staff, whether it be treasurers, admin staff. Now, these people might put in maybe 10 hours a month or whatever it is. Do we got to pay the hourly rates that are set by the United Church every year to those people? Because you can't give an honorarium. It's ongoing all the time. So what's the thing about salaries? Because we were in one church one time, and although they were supposed to be doing so many hours a week, they could have been paying $6 an hour or $16.50 an hour, to different people. So
right. So for ministry personnel, the salary minimums are set. For your lay employees, like your office administrator or your custodian, the congregation negotiates that. Obviously you have to pay at least minimum wage because that's provincial government rules.
okay, yeah.
And we would encourage congregations to actually be paying a living wage, but that would be negotiated separately. If you were doing this collaboratively, though, both churches would be supporting the same wage. You wouldn't have one paying them more or less than the other. You would.
But it should be at least the minimum wage.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. That's a provincial law.
That's the provincial law.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
I wanted to add one little thing about our situation here in the villages churches. Is Hensel has a little bit different situation. The building is sold to a private owner, and we rent the church. So that makes life really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very unique situation. Of course, Hensel is within Western Ontario Waterways Regional
Yeah.
Council, so I'm well
Yep.
aware of the circumstances there.
Good. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Are there other questions? Okay.
Maybe, can I just ask for some advice? So this coming Sunday, I'm chairing a meeting on what a collaborative ministry will work between 3 churches. And yeah, all the congregations are small and their people are, you hear the word burnt out and burnt out from fundraising. And I've got a feeling when I ask if we can give more money to keep the doors open, I've got a pretty good feeling it's going to be no from a lot of these families, that because they just can't afford it. I also have a pretty good gut feeling that the churches that I'm going to try and collaborate with are not going, it might not happen.
Right.
So I've never done anything like this before. So any words of wisdom or that you can share. I had a great talk with Anne Harbridge this morning, and she was wonderful. So I just I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now.
I usually start again by looking at what is the common ground, right? So what do these 3 churches want to accomplish? Collaborative ministry is not necessarily going to be able to keep all the churches involved going for another 20 years, right? But it might be able to help them continue to function longer than they would on their own. And in other cases, it allows them to do ministries that they couldn't do alone, like the example of the youth minister in London. So that's important. Like, are we do we want to maintain that United Church presence? Are we committed to maintaining 3 separate buildings? Or do we just want to make sure we have some place in the area to go for worship? That's the important piece, is to finding out what you have in common, and then what people are willing to share. How flexible are they willing to be to try to come up with a solution that works for them? And I'm guessing that you might be in WOW if you've talked to Anne. Then John is your go-to for support and to help facilitate those conversations as well.
Okay.
Absolutely. I would also encourage starting small. You don't have to leap into, all kinds of things to collaborate on to start with. You could start a couple small areas that you have in common, and then build from there when you evaluate how it's working.
You giving me an example? What do you mean exactly, John, when you say just start small?
Well, let's see. If you want to collaborate on some programs, for instance, I don't know if there's a Sunday school, or maybe you have a men's club or a women's club or a book reading club. You can collaborate on those types of programs that would include all of the churches that you want to collaborate with. If it's about sharing ministry time, I'm not sure if you have a minister in the churches that are collaborating or thinking about collaborating, but what might it look like to have some shared ministry? One of the things that we talked about yesterday, we had the WOW orientation. Horseshoe Falls and Antler River watershed are coming up. But something that was talked about is that like half-time ministries or less than full-time ministries, it's getting really hard to find ministry personnel. And collaboration would allow you to perhaps, at least for ministry personnel or other hired staff, allow for a more full-time position than if you stayed independent.
Right.
So that, these are the things that we need to consider as well. So I would say start small in the sense that, share a couple of things. You might want to share administrative duties like the preparation of the bulletins, and they can be done in one church for all three if there's three of you, things like that. And just work out how the bulletins will get where and all that kind of stuff. Or maybe the prep gets done and the template gets sent to somebody from the other churches and they just print it off for their own church. Things like that, or the PowerPoints, or I don't know all of your circumstances, but as Lynn said, there's lots of things we can find that we have in common. So find a couple commonalities and start with a few of them.
Right. And sometimes it's even just saying the fifth service, or every month with 5 Sundays, the fifth one will be a joint service.
So 4 times a year you gather together. Right.
Just for people to get to know each other too. I also suggest that it be the chair of the boards and a few other interested people that gather monthly for coffee, just to talk about what's happening in their churches and sort of brainstorm ways, and that helps again open up communication.
Okay.
So not specific to your question, Shelley, but just in general then, if you have found the answers satisfactory?
Yeah, like I've got a lot of information here and I hopped on today and yeah, I have. It's been good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mary has her hand up.
In terms of what you mentioned, John, about sharing ministry with a full-time position between 2 churches, we're in the search process now, and I know there's another church in the same situation in our community, but what is the likelihood of any ministers wanting that position? I mean, it's supply and demand right now, right? So that's what we found is there are very few churches that want anything less than full-time in one church.
So we have a lot of ministers in admissions that they need full-time employment, and would, be open. I think you have to ask each applicant, right? Like you create the position and the position description says it is shared between 2 churches, and then those who are interested will apply. But there are a lot of ministers who there's just no way a half-time position is going to pay the bills. So by creating that full-time position, and it's wasn't that long ago that we did have a lot of multi-point pastoral charges where you were doing more than one service a Sunday. So I don't think it's that much of a stretch. But yeah, I think if you're not having success with a part-time position, because there's ministers out there that are getting 2 separate half-time positions on their own, and then they're the ones that have to juggle between the congregations about Christmas Eve and all of that. I think it works much smoother when the congregations have come together to create the position. And that would mean having a joint search team.
Yeah, I agree with Lynn. Again, I know there are challenges, and I think the reality for ministry personnel is that more and more they're going to be looking at multi-point calls or appointments. And that's through, again, we're not creating multi-point pastoral charges these days, but it's through collaborative agreements. So there will often be more than one church involved. And it doesn't mean that a church that is thriving, I say that with hesitance because in different ways we can all be thriving, but hear me for what I'm saying. Let's say a church in a more urban area can't couple or collaborate with a church in a rural area and also share resources, which doesn't have to be on an unequal basis. It can be, whatever the church people can provide is what is accepted and what they can collaborate through. So collaborations, again, happen with churches that are struggling, yes, but it also happens with churches that are doing quite well and not struggling, and they're connecting and collaborating with other churches because that's what their ministry call is to do, or at least one of their ministry calls.
Right.
I don't see any other questions, and we are at our hour. So any last pressing questions? I see there was a question in the chat about getting the video. That'll be posted on each of the regional council websites.
Mm-hmm. It'll take us a few days to get that done, but it will be up there.
Janice, you're asking in the chat about between denominations. Yes, there are ecumenical type collaborations that happen. We have some of them in place already, and we're quite open to that type of collaboration as well, ecumenical ones.
There is an ecumenical ministry sharing handbook specifically for those situations, and it is part of our collaborative toolkit. And it deals with collaborations with Presbyterian, Anglican, or Lutheran churches and what the process would be.
Yeah, and we're not limited to that because in Western Ontario Waterways Regional Council, we have one church that has been for quite some time collaborating between a United Church and a Jewish synagogue. They share a building, yeah, and it's gone really well.
Well, thank you everybody for your time, and again, we're here to answer questions. You can send us an email and reach out, but we also encourage you to, talk to your neighbors and invite them to just do some brainstorming and imagining, and we'll see where the Spirit might take us.
Yeah. Blessings to all of you.